Before we get fully into the conflict perspective on crime, let's talk a little bit about white collar crime and corporate crime. Let's define those. White collar crime is describing crime committed by people of high social status in the course of their occupations. Examples of white collar crime would include bribery of public officials, securities violations, embezzlement, false advertising, price fixing, and so on. Usually when we think of white collar crime, we're thinking of crime committed by individuals in the course of their occupations and also for their own benefit. Corporate crime is crime committed by executives in order to benefit their corporation. Crimes committed by executives in order to benefit their corporation. Examples of that would be back in the 1970s, Ford Motor Company falsified auto safety tests on their car, the Pinto, in order to avoid lawsuits and so on, because their car was designed dangerously. I have here a picture of Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling, who were executives of Enron Corporation. Kenneth Lay was the president, and Jeffrey Skilling was the chief executive officer of Enron Corporation. What they illustrate, I think, is where the line between white-collar crime and corporate crime gets a little blurry. We said before that white-collar crime is crime committed by individuals in the course of their occupations and for their own benefit. And corporate crime was crimes committed by executives in order to benefit their corporation. So Kenneth Lay and Jeffrey Skilling were involved in this whole case of stock fraud, and in the course of their committing this crime, this ongoing crime, they certainly benefited their corporation because what they were doing was increasing the value, pumping up the value of corporate stock. Now, Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling were also major stockholders in this corporation as well. And what they would do is when the price of the stock got high enough, they would sell off a bunch of stock and make a lot of money. So the stock fraud certainly increased the value of the company, and also personally benefited Ken Lay and Jeffrey Skilling and all the other Enron executives who were involved in the scandal. So now we can move to conflict theory. If you remember from chapter 4, when we were talking about chapter 4 and we were describing conflict theory's understanding of social institutions, one of the things we said was that according to conflict theorists, the elite, the power elite that runs society, uses and manipulates social institutions for its own benefit. So in this case, now we're talking about conflict theorists who are influenced heavily by Karl Marx and his understanding of class conflict, are talking about the nature of the law in a capitalist society, that the law, and therefore our understanding of crime is a reflection of this conflict between classes. So in this case, it's the capitalist class, the privileged class that's able to use the law for its own benefit. So one thing that conflict theorists would talk about would be the criminal justice system, the system of police, courts, and prisons that are set up to deal with people who are accused of committing a crime. One thing that they would argue is that the power elite that runs society also then controls the criminal justice system. It tends to favor them. So there's a kind of a double standard in the way that people are treated within the criminal justice system. People's ability to navigate the criminal justice system is going to depend on their class position. So all you need to do is think about, the difference between a Kenneth Lay or a Jeffrey Skilling, I should say, and an ordinary worker or even a poor person confronting the criminal justice system. The law says that we all have a right to an attorney, for example. We all have a right to a public defender if we can't afford a lawyer. But, we understand, though, that if people are faced with the problem of having to rely on the public defender, they're more likely going to be convicted of some crime. On the other hand, Jeffrey Skilling was able to hire an entire legal team. He had something like, when he came up for trial, he had something like 20 lawyers. So there might be a difference, there might be a double standard in terms of the way people are treated within the criminal justice system. Now, the other thing that conflict theorists would talk about is this notion of the law as an instrument of oppression of one class over another. So if we were looking at, for example, Karl Marx, he describes the state. He talks about the state. And one of the things he says about the state is that in his words, it is an apparatus through which one class oppresses another. So the political organization of the state tends to represent the interests of the ruling class. So in that case, then, what would the law be? Overall, what conflict theorists would say is that the law tends to represent the interests of the most powerful classes in society, and that it's a tool designed by the powerful to maintain their privileged position. For example, that I have here a picture of the Homestead Strike of 1892. This is just one example of how, when workers were on strike at the Homestead plant in Pittsburgh, the company could call upon the state, actually make a call to the governor of Pennsylvania to send out the militia to force an end, right, to that strike. So the law in this case and the legal apparatus in this case is seen to work to the advantage of the most privileged class. So the law becomes, from this point of view, a tool designed by the powerful to maintain their privileged position. So I've brought you through all three of the major paradigms in sociology and how they all understand crime and deviance. What I want to do next, and what I want to do to end here, is just kind of walk you through the rest of the chapter so that you can read this stuff on your own. I wanted to emphasize in my presentation here the theoretical part, but I think the rest of the chapter is fairly straightforward, and I think you'll be able to handle it fine. So what Henson does after he gets done presenting all these different theories is he talks about reactions to deviance. How does society react to deviance? And he describes, or he talks about several different topics. So pay attention, right, in the chapter to what he says about street crime and prisons. Can you answer these questions that I have here? How does the United States compare to other nations in prison population? What does the prison population look like and why? And what is something like the 3 strikes and you're out laws? Has crime been on the decline? What's the debate over the declining crime rate? And does Henslin say anything about the reliability of crime statistics? What is the recidivism rate? That's something we've already talked about. The recidivism rate and discussions about the effectiveness of the criminal justice system. What controversies and debates surround the death penalty? What about legal change? Is the concept of crime stable, or is it something that changes? What's a hate crime? Oh, I already mentioned this one. How reliable are official crime statistics? And what do we mean by police discretion? And then finally, what is the medicalization of deviance? What is it we are doing when we are medicalizing deviance? So there you go. That's it. If you can now take this page with all these questions on there and walk yourself through the rest of the chapter, you'll have a good understanding of all the material that follows Henslin's discussion of the theories of crime and deviance. Okay? So